G'day there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today I'm going to start a new series on my channel to show off Rhino Inside, which is a new tool for Rhinoceros and Grasshopper that comes with it. A really exciting series that I think people will really find a lot of use out of. So Rhino Inside is it's an open source work in progress project for Rhino that essentially allows things like Grasshopper to speak with other software. In particular, we're going to look at Rhino Inside Revit in this series, which is really exciting. And hats off to the team and to Robert McNeil and associates for setting this up. I think it's great to see software companies collaborate, or at least force collaboration to occur. I wouldn't say this is necessarily a two-way stream from what I've seen entirely, but I think that it's great to see that these two programs have some connectivity. But the best part for me is that we can use Grasshopper inside Revit, which is really exciting. I'm not sure what this means for Dynamo. Obviously, it still has its use. It still directly works with Revit. Rhino Inside isn't as easy to operate and not as smooth as well. So it's more of an advanced user tool at the moment, but I'm sure it could be packaged in a way that it could seriously put Dynamo's future in a little bit of jeopardy. But that's okay. Maybe it will mean that the two might become one, which could be really exciting. So in order to get it, you need to visit this link to download Rhino Inside, but also to download Rhino Work in Progress, or essentially the beta for Rhino 7. And this is all publicly available as long as you give them your email, which is really, really generous of Rhino to set up. You also need Rhino 6, so you'll need a license. If you don't have this available, you'll need to get an evaluation copy of Rhino, which they offer a 90-day trial for, which again is very generous, so hats off to the team. This series will cover a few things. I've only really planned out 3 sessions at the moment, but as I find new workflows to share, I'll be sure to add them to the series as well. So we're going to look at just dealing with Revit elements and getting them into Rhino today using Grasshopper. We're going to look at reading and setting Revit parameters using Grasshopper as well in the second and third part. And I'll try to show things that are relatively useful to everyday workflows, not things like just creating complex geometry for the sake of it. So in this video, specifically, we're going to be filtering elements by a few criteria, and then we're going to get those elements and we're going to bake them into Rhino. And I'm going to show you how to build a neat little script that can do this, one that you'll find quite useful, I think. So I'm going to be using Rhino 6 or Rhino Work in Progress with my Rhino 6 license and Revit 2019.2 today. So you'll need those or similar to follow along. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So I'm currently in Revit in the basic sample project, and what I've done is after I've installed Rhino, Rhino Work in Progress and Rhino Inside Revit, this little tool appears on your toolbar when you restart Revit, and you click on this and essentially it boots up an additional toolbar. So this is Rhino Inside Revit essentially. So the things that we'll be focusing on today are mainly the Rhino and the Grasshopper section, but for anyone that runs Python shell out of Grasshopper, out of Rhino, sorry, you have this available as well. And there's also a player to run Grasshopper scripts as well. I haven't tried it yet, but I assume it's a bit like Dynamo Player, so I'll try it out sometime soon. You can also change how geometry previews within Revit from Rhino Inside Revit. And you can recompute to sort of reevaluate the Revit model at certain points in time. There's also the option to bake selected elements, but I haven't really found the way that this works yet. I'm not sure, maybe if it's in certain types of views only. But you can see here I'm selecting elements and it's not ungraying this option. As soon as I come to this ribbon, it freezes up. So it might be maybe because I have Grasshopper open, but today I'm going to show you how to use Grasshopper to do this with a few more extra functions added on top. So let's just go to Rhino, and I've already got a Grasshopper script sort of sitting there waiting to go. But what I have as well is Rhino, so that's really exciting already. What I've noticed is its navigation tools are different in Shortcut. So typically I can't do control because I'm running a remote desktop session and it doesn't like that shortcut. But I think control and right click lets you zoom in and out. But I find I just do middle click zoom extents most of the time instead. You hold down right mouse button to pan still, or to orbit, sorry, and shift and right mouse button to pan. So pretty similar controls, and otherwise you're pretty much running Rhino at this point. You have all the same tools, all the same modeling available that you would usually when you run Rhino. And you can save as and save your Rhino files as well. But what we'll do today, we'll focus on this and we'll focus on Grasshopper. So I'm just gonna minimize my Grasshopper just so it fits, because you will find it's hard to sort of dock all your windows at the same time. Usually what I like to do is sort of minimize Revit to some degree. I might actually make Revit just a little bit smaller, because you don't really need to see much of Revit unless you're doing like a geometry preview. So again, I'll just go back to Rhino and Grasshopper, and I'll just make these a little bit bigger. All right, so let's get started. So as soon as you set up Rhino Inside Revit and you open up Grasshopper from there, you'll notice we have a few extra things. We have a little tab of Revit elements here. I find that I don't tend to use these ones too much, because from what I can see, these are like a best of or a highlights reel. What we really want to do is go down to the Revit tab, and these are all for Rhino Inside. So really exciting, lots of new tools to play with. Each one of these has a lot of tools under it. I'm not going to go through every single one, because to be honest, you can do that yourself, and I highly recommend you do. Just have a look at what all the tools are, what they're called, and it will give you an idea of what the program is capable of. It can't do everything Dynamo can do, but it can do a lot. So it can access a lot of information. It's worth noting as well that you can access the Iron Python and the Revit API through Grasshopper scripts that use Python. So I'll show you how to do a little bit of that in video 3, I think. But it's really important to note that that's available, because that pretty much unlocks pretty much everything in Dynamo if you know how to write Python. So really exciting. But let's get started using Rhino Inside. So what I'm going to do first is get a category picker. I think the categories picker is under input. Yeah, so you can pick 3 things. You can pick analytical, annotation, or model categories. So anyone that's used Revit will know roughly what at least annotation and model categories mean. We're just going to get a model category picker. So if I zoom in, I can see already I'm just getting generic models. If I drop this down, you can see I can pick any category from the list, and I can just go down the bottom there as well. If I right click on the node, I can change it to a checklist. The good thing about a checklist is you can select multiple categories at the same time. The problem with the checklist is it's really big, so you may not like that. So I usually use drop downs, and I just use multiple drop downs to save real estate in my canvas. So what I'll do is just scroll down to the bottom, and I'm just going to deal with walls at the moment. So I'm going to focus on the wall category in this Revit model, and note that it's talking to this Revit model. So everything we do is drawing on Revit now. So it's not like it's waiting for us to bake the script or run the script. It's talking live. So that's really exciting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to filter elements. So what I'm going to be aiming for is this a node on the document called document elements. So it gets you an active model list. You can see at the moment it's expecting some filter criteria in order to hone down on what we really want to show from Revit. So we're going to set up a filter. So as you can guess, that's under the filter tab. So we're going to use a category filter. And I'm going to add my category or categories here. And then I'm going to filter my walls. So that's really exciting. So now we have all these elements from Revit. And these are being read as, I think, Revit DB elements. So they are actually model elements from Revit. They have an ID. It's not just a string, it's actually a Revit element that it's holding onto here. So really exciting. These are my walls. So it's found all 55 walls in my scene. So what I'm going to do now is get their geometry. So what I'm going to do in Revit is just halftone everything. And then I'm just going to go to wireframe mode, because I really want my Rhino selection to be quite obvious. So I'm going to go to wireframe, and then I'll just go back to Rhino. Notice that when I go back to Revit, it sort of hides everything in Rhino and Grasshopper from Rhino Inside. That can take a bit of getting used to. So as soon as you go back to Revit, it sort of loses focus on those programs, but they are still there in the background. So as soon as you go back to them in the ribbon, they'll come back. So you can see I deselect, reselect, and I'm back. So what we're going to do now is get the geometry of those elements. Note that it is a little bit slow to get geometry into Rhino Inside, into Rhino. So you don't want to get too many elements when you do this. Get a feel for it. Do a couple of selections and element geometry, and you'll see roughly the speed to expect. We're not talking like Rhino speed here, we're talking a little bit slower, but it's not as slow as, say, Dynamo would be to do this. Okay, so we're going to use the element geometry node. So I think it's under element geometry. And all it needs is the elements. So I'll just copy this in here, and essentially it should give us our geometry. So it's doing a geometry preview in Revit at the moment, which is really exciting. So these are actually the elements in Revit, but the preview from Grasshopper over the top. So this is coming out of Rhino Inside. So already very exciting. As well as that, I can also see that in Rhino, I've got the preview as well. So that's pretty cool. So I could just bake these elements straight away. I could just go middle click, bake, and this would bake them straight into Rhino as they are, all the walls. But what I'm going to do before that, and I'm going to bake them in a little bit of a better way using a node from Lunchbox as well, I'm going to show you how to set up more filters, because at the moment we're only filtering based on walls. We've got every single wall on our model. This might not be appropriate on a project where, say, you have multiple levels or you have multiple types that you want to focus on. So we're going to look at some different filters. The first one we'll look at is our level filter. So obviously you'll want to filter by level a lot of the time. And we're going to get what's called a level picker from input, document levels picker. And this lets us pick a level or levels in our project. In this case, I will use a checkbox list. So what I thought when I first used Rhino Inside, I would need to do is to do multiple filters. I thought I'd do shift select and just feed multiple filters into my filter node. But unfortunately, this is wrong. So this isn't the way to do it. And I'll show you what does happen. Looks like it's taking a little while. You can see what I mean when the geometry processing speed isn't like a Rhino speed talking to Grasshopper. It's still going through the Revit API, and it's still being slowed down as a result. Looks like it's actually getting quite slow here. Hopefully it doesn't crash. So I did actually crash there, unfortunately, and I realized why now. I was actually asking for a lot of geometry all at once. So what I was doing there is saying, give me level 1 and level 2, and also walls, but I was sort of proving my point as to why crossing filters this way doesn't work, because it doesn't give me all the walls that belong to level 1. It actually breaks these into two filters, and one of them is saying give me all the walls, the other one's saying give me everything on a level or two levels. So I was really asking for a good few hundred elements to be geometry. So that's why I crashed. So what you want to do instead in this case is we want to use a AND filter. So I'm just going to go back to my Revit tab, and I'm just going to look at filter, and I'm just going to expand this and go to logical AND filter. This lets you combine two filters so that all have to be true. So now this will give you one filter instead of two. So I'm just going to delete that before I use it again by accident. Actually, I'll keep it, but I'll disconnect that filter. And in this case, I'm just going to feed my AND filter through. Interesting. It's got a warning. Element filter. Ah, of course. So I do want to filter using the AND filter still. I just don't want to filter with two filters using shift select. So what I need to do is connect this back. So I'll just do an AND filter, get this filter, and instead filter by that for the geometry instead. So I'll just re-establish my graphic settings again. So halftone and wireframe. And now you can see we only get the walls that meet both those criteria. So now those walls have to both be on level 1 and also walls. I could do the same. I could turn off level 1 as part of my filter criteria and say just level 2. And I can see now I'm dealing with just level 2. Likewise, I could say both. I could say I want level 1 and level 2, but of course it doesn't belong on both level 1 and level 2, so none of them meet the criteria. So you have to be mindful of sort of how these all work. What you can also do is change that to a drop-down list as well, just to make it easier to deal with. So let's say now we're dealing with the walls on level 1 and level 2. Maybe we want to filter by type as well. So what we can do there is go to document, I think it's element types or document types. Actually, I believe it's under inputs. Yeah, so we want element types by name. So the way that this works is you take a whole bunch of elements, and essentially it gives you a filtered list of all the types of those elements. You can see if we put it in here from our elements, every single wall that we have will tell us its type. So this is too many, obviously. We don't want this many. What you can do instead is take it all the way back to the categories node and just feed in your category to this node. And this will just give you one of each type in that category. So let's say we only care about interior partition. What we can do now is set up another filter, and we'll use a type filter. Feed in that type, and then we'll shift select and add this as our third filter. Now you can see we only get those partitions. So you can see that it's really easy to filter and hone down on specific elements, and it's also quite dangerous if you don't, because you run the risk of crashing Revit and Rhino, of course, because you're asking for a lot of geometry. Keep in mind, if you can avoid getting geometry of elements, great. In this case, we do need the geometry because we're going to bake it. But if you can just work with the elements as elements, all the better, because it can handle those very quickly. Whereas this is a little bit harder for it to do. But anyway, what we're going to do now is we're just going to take our and filter away, and we're just going to focus on filtering by category only. So in this case, we get all our walls, as you can see. Now, let's say we want to bake these into our model. So we have one option. We can just go here, middle click for our radial menu, and go bake, and bake it onto a layer in Rhino Inside Revit. That's one way. However, what I want to do is put it on a specific layer named after the category that we're choosing. So what I'm going to do is get some information about the category. So I'm going to get a category identity node. And what we can do is go back, take our category, and get some of its information. So what I care about here is the category's name, which in this case is walls. So we're going to use that to name our layer. So when I want to bake things on a specific layer in Grasshopper, I use something from the package Lunchbox. So I believe Lunchbox is here, and it's a node called Object Bake. So what I might do is just find it in here and then find it in the ribbon. So I'll get Object Bake, and what I'll do is I'll just go Control Alt Select, and it's under Lunchbox, under Workflow. There we go. That's a really handy tip. Control Alt Select on a left click and hold it will tell you where a tool comes from. So really easy, especially for Rhino Inside, where you might not know where tools come from. Really handy. So Bake needs a few things in order to work. It needs what's called a toggle. So this is basically something that will tell it to bake. So we're going to use a button because we only want to tell it to do it once. And a button basically says true once and then goes back to false. So you essentially click it. So that's going to be our toggle for baking elements. We then need our geometry objects. So in this case, they're going to be these. This is the geometry coming out of Revit through Rhino Inside. And then we need our layer. So in this case, we're going to name our layer. So we're going to name it after the actual element. So if you don't have a layer present and you set a name, it will create a new layer with that name. Pretty much from there, that's probably good enough. But what we might do is just add object and layer color. So we're just going to get a color picker. And we'll just get I've got quite a few custom components in the way here. I think there's a color picker, color RGB. No, there's a special one I'm looking for. It's called a color picker. There it is. So this one's a more detailed color picker. You might recognize it from inside Rhino itself. It's quite a common representation of color. So we're going to make that our object and our layer color. And let's just set these to wireless so that they don't get in the way of our script. By just right clicking, hidden, and we'll do the same for our bake button. We'll put that near the front. So I like to put my inputs really close together. And we'll go back to the start, get our color picker as well, by just clicking and dragging it. And we essentially have our inputs for a Rhino baking or a Rhino baking script or a Rhino bakery, as I like to call it. So these are our inputs now. So what I can do now essentially is just move this over the top so we don't have to see Revit. And let's see Grasshopper from Rhino Inside working with Rhino in Rhino Inside. So I'm just going to show my layer tab there and just do a zoom extents to get a bit closer. So you can see in my preview, we're going to bake now. So what we can do now is just say walls. We'll get a color that we like. Let's just say this one, and we bake. And essentially this should bake those elements into our model. So that's pretty exciting. I might just turn off the geometry preview because it's overlapping with what I can see. It's interesting, it's only baked a few elements. So it didn't seem to bake all of them. It seems like the filtering is still persisting. So what I might do is just recompute. So I think my filtering is persisting. So I'm going to do a recompute, which basically says refresh my model, rerun the Grasshopper script in the state that it's in. So we'll try that. And I'll just boot up Rhino as well. So let's just try that again. I think that should work now because we're only using our filter elements. So I'll try baking that again. Interesting. It's still only baking a few elements. That's a bit strange. It was baking fine not that long ago. I'll just see if I can figure out what's going on. I don't think there's any problems with it. It's giving me my gem. I know what's wrong. So I think it's only getting the first list. I think this may not be a a single list. See, it's got a few B-reps. So these are all like sub-lists or branches on a data tree. So what I need to do is flatten this. So I'm going to flatten the output of my geometry node. Now this should give me what I want. So I'll just go back and I'll just delete my wall layer. So now this should flatten all the geometry into one big list and bake them all together. There we go. So there's all my walls, and that was really quick, right? That didn't take long at all. Obviously walls are quite a simple geometry category. We can pick a more complicated one. Let's say doors. Doors are a little bit more complex. So it's going to go recompute all the preview geometry. Let's make them like a yellow and bake. And you'll see there's our door layer, and here's all our doors. And it was so quick. It even brings in all the lines that it can see. It brings in a lot of detail about the elements, and it brings them in as all the elements they were comprised of. So it'll bring them in as B-reps, but also lines if there were lines, like model lines in the element. So really cool. So let's just do a few more. Let's just go floors and bake, and we'll get probably curtain panels, and we'll do curtain wall mullions as well. So we'll make our curtain panels like a blue, but we'll make it quite a light blue. Actually, I'll just do that. Cool. Baking our curtain panels, and there they are. Let's do the same for our windows as well, actually, because windows and curtain panels pretty much do the same thing in this model. But you can see how easy it is. We can just keep going through and pretty much bake whatever we want until we're done. And you can see that it's creating layers each time we do. So it's a little bit smarter than like a default bake function. So I'll just bake my windows and my curtain wall mullions up here. Obviously I want this to be maybe a little bit darker. So it's fully up to you, but it's a really quick way to set up your model. Obviously probably the final touch for this specific model is roofs. And we'll just make that like a purple or a blue. Cool. So check it out. We've basically got our Revit model on layers by category in our model. And obviously you can add more filtering criteria. So you can name the layers in different ways. You can name them based on filtering by level and category. You could do sub-layers based on setting this up in Grasshopper. But essentially it creates a little handy little script to get elements out of here quite quickly. So hopefully that sort of helps get you started with Rhino Inside and see the potential for what it can do. In the next two lessons, we'll look at some more complex examples where we're going to take parameters and we're going to set them and we're going to read them to do particular things in Revit itself. So we're going to change Revit geometry based on what we do in Grasshopper, which is really important, I think, because you still need it to do useful things in Revit. Otherwise, it's really just a geometry exercise, which we don't want it to be. So thanks for watching that. We've got a few sessions coming up, as I said. But hopefully that gets you started. If you've got any feedback or queries or comments, feel free to leave it down below. I'd love to hear from anyone that worked on the program itself. I think it's brilliant. I'm really enjoying my time with it. And I can't wait to see what it's going to be like when it finally gets out of the beta or work in progress stage. And I really commend the team for their creativity and their initiative in putting this together. I'll be making a few more parts, and hopefully the series will just keep going over time. But expect the next part to be the next video I upload, so I'll try to continue this as long as I can. Thanks for watching today. If you're not already following and subscribing, feel free to do so. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Take care. Bye.